Hey friends, welcome to Shifting Culture. This show exists because of you, your curiosity, your care, your belief that deep, honest conversations matter, and it's also sustained by you. We're listener supported, which means that if you find value here, you can help keep it going. For as little as $5 a month at shiftingculture.substack.com, you'll get ad-free early access episodes, bonus shows, and reflections I don't share anywhere else. It's more than support, it's partnership. And I'm grateful you're here. So go to shiftingculture.substack.com and subscribe for as little as $5 a month. And now, on with the show.
The politics of this world is one that is about mitigating death and who is allowed to die and who shouldn't die. And we just have to extricate ourselves from that way of thinking about the world and our neighbors. So instead, neighbors are not enemies. Instead, they're gifts from God.
Hello, and welcome to the Shifting Culture podcast, in which we have conversations about the culture we create and the impact we can make. We long to see the body of Christ look like Jesus. I'm your host, Joshua Johnson. We live in a world often defined by borders, fear, and division. But what if we could reimagine migration not as a threat, but as a sacred journey? Today, we're diving into a conversation that challenges what we think we know about immigrants, hospitality, and what it truly means to love our neighbor. I'm sitting down with Isaac Villegas, a Mennonite pastor and author of Migrant God, who will take us on a transformative exploration of how faith calls us to see strangers not as enemies, but as gifts from God. From sanctuary churches protecting undocumented families to profound moments of unexpected hospitality, this conversation will challenge you to see the world and your neighbors through a lens of radical love. So join us as we navigate how we love our neighbors, no matter who they are. Here is my conversation with Isaac Villegas. Isaac, welcome to Shifting Culture. Excited to have you on. Thank you so much for coming, joining me today. It's going to be a good conversation.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm very much looking forward to this. To our conversation.
I think about your book, Migrant God, and what you're talking about, stories of people actually caring for migrants and being the church and showing the love of Jesus to people, which provides some really hopeful discourse of what it looks like to be neighborly and to actually show hospitality. I'd love to know some of your values. What has shaped you growing up? What made you the man you are today?
Well, just Joshua, to pick up on what you were saying there, I'm so glad that you think of what I'm offering here as hopeful. I mean, that was one of the maybe primary energies at the heart of this book is this world's hard and I despair most of the time when it comes to immigration. But I've seen some things and I know some people, and these stories have inspired me to hope for new possibilities, and they got stuck in my head and I had to write them out. So the struggle for hope, I think, is kind of what I'm trying to do here. Grew up child of immigrants, parents, my dad from Colombia, my mom from Costa Rica. Grew up, I was born in LA, kind of Latino community there with family. The church has always been central to my life. We grew up Catholic, then got involved in the charismatic Pentecostal movement, vineyard adjacent folks, evangelical. I mean, I'm basically an ecclesial mutt. I'm now a Mennonite. You're a Mennonite pastor. Mennonite was drawn to the Mennonite church for their peace witness. I thought, in this world that faces so much violence, so much war, I needed a church tradition that would hold us accountable to the witness of Jesus' way of peace. And so I found Mennonites to be part of that historic peace church, and that's where I am now. So those are kind of some of the threads, like growing up an immigrant kid, growing up in the church, maybe both those things coming together, and now I got this book.
Nice. Well, okay, so let's just pull on that Mennonite thread a little bit. So if people are involved in the peace movement, looking at Jesus and the way of Jesus as nonviolent, as peaceful, bringing about a place of shalom and peace for all people. Why did you really say that's a really primary value for me? So this is the thing I'm really attracted to. What made it primary and not just an ancillary value in the church for you?
Yeah, no, I like the way you're framing that. I'll answer this two ways. One, I'm thinking about this. One is autobiographically. I had a bit of a crisis of faith when 9/11 happened. So I was in college, and I just remember kind of the calls in my Christian community for revenge, for vengeance. Bush came out and called it a crusade and uses religious language, and a bunch of Christians got on board with that. And I thought to myself, like, this just doesn't quite add up with what I've learned at church about Jesus, who, when things get tough, you don't give up on peace. I mean, he was crucified after all. He did not respond with violence in kind. He came back resurrected for peace as the Prince of Peace, we call him in Scripture. So that was a crisis of faith because I'm like, I trusted you to tell me about this Jesus. Now you're saying what he said doesn't matter because the world's more complicated and there's violence, therefore X, Y, and Z. That didn't make sense. And that's what kind of set me on this trajectory of really understanding that the heart of Jesus's life, what we see in him is God's love for the world. And that love is peaceable, which means you don't kill enemies. Instead, you love them. And then maybe the other part is just digging into scripture and church tradition to realize that who Jesus is, the peace witness part of his life is not ancillary. It's not secondary. It's actually the heart of who he is on earth. I mean, it's just this covenant of peace that God has offered creation. God offering up that rainbow as a sign for no more vengeance. God is not a God of revenge. God sending his son to offer us this way of life that is true life, that is abundant life. Maybe those are two ways that I would think about that autobiographically in terms of 9/11, and then scripturally digging more into those scriptures witness to Jesus as God's peace among us.
So if we are followers of Jesus, what should our posture in the world be when it comes to nation states that we live in around the world? What is our primary posture of the way that we enter and show up to the world with community and with the rest of the body of Christ?
Yeah, I would say the thing that I think about with this is, I mean, yeah, so nation state, like for sure. Also realizing that here in the United States, government means all kinds of different layers of it. Federal government, it can be very different from state, can be very different from county, from city. One of the things I highlight in my book is the way that here in our area, we had counties and our municipalities, our cities, the local elected government were like, hey, wait a minute. These ICE raids, what's going on with the federal government during the first Trump administration was really messing with our way of life, what we valued as communities, just like how we live day to day, week to week. And so it was interesting to see local representatives who were pushing back against the overreach of the federal government in terms of immigration enforcement. So I guess I'm just always like, we have to be specific about what we're talking about. So sometimes the government or the state can really do some bad things and we should say no. Sometimes the state can do some really good things and we say like, hey, that's awesome. Let's encourage that. So I like the way that one theologian has talked about the church and Christianity. We're always making tactical alliances with the state and with government. So we're not fully on board being like, oh yeah, anything you do, we're there with you. It's like, no, actually, we've discerned that we also care about the unhoused community. Let's work with government agencies to handle that. Oh, we've discovered that we also care about Meals on Wheels. Let's figure out a way to support that in ways maybe the federal government is not right now. So it's always tactical. It's always in the midst of discernment, having a community around you to remind you that, our primary witness is to Jesus Christ. And that means something for our politics right now.
As we transition in and move into migrants and immigrants specifically and how we can love them well, how did you start, or maybe your community, your church community, start to say, hey, this is something that we want to show as love of neighbor through our immigrant community? How did you start to get involved in loving immigrants?
Mm-hmm. On the one hand, like for me personally, it's my family story. So it's like, it was never quite a decision. It's just kind of like what we grew up with, who we are, and growing up in the Southwest too, where, it's just not unusual for friends growing up would, have family on either side of the border, go back and forth with or without documentation. I mean, it just wasn't as big of a deal back then, to be honest. So I'd say it became more and more the focus of my church work here in North Carolina because of the anti-immigrant trend we saw in our country. It's just gotten worse and worse. One story I tell in the book that pops in my mind as maybe the moment where our church said, you know what? We got to say that the gospel tells us to do something else here in terms of loving our neighbors who are undocumented. And that was during the Obama administration. We discovered the Department of Homeland Security had started setting up these regional ICE offices that were unmarked. So they had, they're big ICE prisons. ICE is Immigration and Custom Enforcement prisons. But then there's all these like areas in North Carolina where there's not a big facility. But when ICE does arrest people and want to deport them, they need a way station for them. So we found one through some investigative reporting that a journalist did and found this unmarked ICE facility in the middle of a suburban strip mall. And we were like, this is a problem. Like they don't want to be known. This is part of what they're after. They operate in secret. So we decided to bring attention to their presence in the community. And it was during Holy Week. During Holy Week on Maundy Thursday or Holy Thursday, this is the case in a variety of church traditions, but it's an especially important day for Mennonites because it's the day we practice foot washing. So Jesus commands the disciples on that last night with him, or he doesn't just command, he does. He washes the disciples' feet. And then he says, do this to others, to show them this love that I have for you. It's a commissioning. So we remember that every year on Holy Thursday. So we decided to take our Holy Thursday service to the ICE detention center and say, hey, look, this is where the church is the church. This is where we wash our brothers and sisters' feet. You're holding some of our brothers and sisters there in captivity. We want to wash their feet. Will you let us? They did not let us. Instead, they called the police. We set up our foot washing station there in their intake parking lot, kind of to block their activities. And we had a traditional foot washing service, a whole liturgy of foot washing. And we washed all the people there who had gathered their feet. Again, asked to wash the detainees' feet. They just the ICE officials locked the doors, and we slipped a letter under to have a formal request. So I think that was and then we did that year after year, the same kind of witness, just both to let people know this was there. We let the press know they came. And then also to be like, when we can't figure out anything to do, at the very least, what we can do is be Christian and be Christian in public and say, this is where our witness is leading us.
Let's be Christian in public. Let's actually follow Christ and do what he says. That is something that I don't know why that's a difficult thing for Christians to do, is to be Christ-like in the midst of the world. But one of the things, so if we're talking about like a political system that you're in, you're looking at policies and procedures and what is good for the country. And then practically, what does it look like to love our neighbors? And Jesus calls us to love our neighbors, love our enemies, love one another. It's a pretty big call. And those policies are put aside when you have somebody right in front of you, right? So you show hospitality. How do you think Christians navigate policies and just loving the people in front of us?
Yeah.
Hey friends, thanks for being here. Really, Shifting Culture isn't just a podcast. It's a community of people leaning in, asking deeper questions, and reimagining what's possible together. If the conversations here have meant something to you, would you take a moment to leave a rating or review? It helps others find us, and it's one simple way to support the show. You could also find more at shiftingculture.substack.com. That's where you'll get ad-free, early access episodes and some things I only share with subscribers. And if you got a creative project stirring in you, something that needs to be told, shaped, or shared, I'd love to walk with you in that. That's what we do at Shifting Culture Productions. Thanks again for listening. Let's get back to the episode.
Well, I like the way you're talking about, what does it mean to, this primary thing that organizes our life, this command from from Jesus is love your neighbor. I mean, it's not just from Jesus. They're in the Old Testament too. God's command to love your neighbor and to care for your neighbor. And I mean, I like to say these days, especially is, when Jesus tells us to love our neighbor, he doesn't add and check their documentation status. So, you know what I mean? There's no footnotes or there's no caveats. There's parentheses. It's just love your neighbor, period. So I think that's important to remember is that like that's our primary witness in the world. All the stuff that the government tells us, that the nation state, their policies, I mean, sure, like all of that is there. It's important for establishing common life, how we live together as complex communities. But none of it should get in the way of this primary call in our lives. What it means to be a Christian, the follower of Jesus, is love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. Everything is contained in those two commandments, Jesus says. So yeah, like you're saying, we have to navigate the policies. Yes. Have to navigate the politics. Yes. At the end of the day, we serve God and not, we are answerable to God and not to government authorities. What Peter says in the book of, I think, Acts 5, when he's called before the courts and they're telling him to stop preach the gospel, to stop living out this good news. And he's like, him and the disciples are like, whoa, wait a minute. Just so you understand, our call is to obey God and not man.
Yes, that is true. Our call is to obey God. What does that look like then practically when there may be an undocumented person around us and our call is to love God and not man, not the government? What does it look like practically? I'll give you, one of the short films that was nominated for an Academy Award this year was called Aline, and it was about an undocumented immigrant that gets called in for a random interview and question for documentation. Like, this is something that he needed for documentation. He goes in with his wife and his child. Like, he's married. He's been here for 5 years. And so this is just the next step. And then during that interview process, he gets picked up by ICE and deported when that's, wasn't supposed to happen at that moment. Like, it was a very powerful little short film. Recommend a lot of people go watch it. It's free on Vimeo if you research it. If we're in a situation like that and calling like, hey, here's somebody, our friend, what's a practical way for us to actually step in and show love during that time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So during the first Trump administration, thanks for the recommendation for that documentary. I'm jotting it down right here. I'm interested.
It's that, yeah, Lien.
Lien. Okay.
Yeah.
During the first Trump administration, also it's just so wild to me that I have to say the first Trump administration. It's so crazy. I'd finished the book in 2022, the manuscript, but I had my last edits last year, 2024, like, I don't know, spring going into summer. And in that moment, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm talking about Trump in the past tense. And it could very well be the case that he's president again. And here we are. Anyhow, so during the first Trump administration, our church, in partnership with our Mennonite church, rent space from a Presbyterian church. And we decided to partner together to provide what's called protective ecclesial sanctuary. So to invite somebody to live on church property who's undocumented, an undocumented neighbor, and to say, we're going to protect you from ICE. ICE does not want to trespass onto church property to conduct their business. This was in the first Trump administration. It's different now. And so we believe we can keep you safe, and we will do trainings to figure out how to, block doors, civil disobedience, whatever it might be. Rosa is her name, approached us through her attorney and said, you know what? She's in a legal process. She has a case before the court. They're sorting this out. This is a long process. In previous presidential administrations, the federal government the executive branch never wants to infringe upon the courts, the judicial branch. They want to allow space for the judiciary to do their business. And so Department of Homeland Security and ICE would never interrupt that. So if somebody had a case pending, they wouldn't deport them because it would be getting in the way of the courts. Anyhow, That changed when Trump was elected president the first time, and he's told the Department of Homeland Security to no longer honor those agreements, those protocols. And so they started flagging people for deportation who actually had cases before courts. Rosa was one of those people. Her attorney contacted us. We said yes. And we invited her to live on church property. I mean, she's a mom. She has 3 children who are citizens of the United States. She didn't want to be sent away. She, lived here for decades. And that meant we had to remodel a church office into a bedroom. This really changes church life, and to have somebody live there. So we had to remodel a office space to be her bedroom. We had bathrooms, of course. Every churches have bathrooms, but we didn't have a bathroom like with a shower. So we had to remodel a kind of a utility closet that had the proper water hookups into a shower. General contractor at church dedicated his time and made that happen. And yeah, she lived there. We had to organize volunteer groups to bring her groceries, because the fear is, as soon as you step off of church property, ICE might be monitoring you, and they will pick you up, take you away. So she just stayed there, and it was one of those times where I realized that my seminary education did not prepare me for the importance of Excel spreadsheets, actually. Just the mundane things of like, all right, who's doing groceries this week? Who's going to run these errands? All of that. It's also one of these things where my friend Julie Peoples, who is a pastor in Greensboro, her church also had somebody in sanctuary. And so we were talking a lot. And she was just like, you know what? It feels like we're trying to build this plane while we're flying it, because figuring out because I remember I got a text from Rosa that first week. She was with us, and she's like, thank you very much, Pastor. Everything's, and she's like, but I'm just wondering, how do I do my laundry? And I was just like, oh my gosh, laundry. Obviously, I did not think about that. So I had to figure out another volunteer rotation of people to do laundry. I mean, it was wild. It was important work, holy, mundane work. And we succeeded in keeping her safe. So that's one example of, what some communities do to keep our neighbors safe when the government wants to get rid of them.
So then give me another example of people that are trying to immigrate, migrants that maybe are held in a detention center in Mexico, Tijuana, across the border. What are some things that people, the body of Christ, is doing for people in detention centers and showing the love of Christ to them?
Yeah, so there's the detention centers in Mexico. They try to push them further south than Tijuana and on the border. So I don't know. It's hard. It's a wild world in those detention centers. I do know about shelters that have emerged in Mexico, migrant shelters that, when people are released, let's say they're deported, released into Mexico, or released from detention centers in Mexico, they need somewhere to go. They might not even be from Mexico. They do nobody. What are they supposed to do? So I spent some time at a migrant shelter, Casa del Migrante in Tijuana. It's operated by the Scalabrini Roman Catholic Order of priests. The order was founded in the mid to late 19th century, and their constitutions, like what their reason for existence, is to minister to people who are on the move. So migrants on the move. So these are people who, around the globe, they have these shelters and ministries for people on the move. People on the move because they're fleeing violence, threats of violence. People on the move because of economic instability or governmental instability, civil wars. People on the move for the climate crisis. There's just not ways to harvest vegetables like they used to. The economy's bad, all of that. So their shelter in Tijuana, that one was founded in 1984 or 1987. I can't remember right now. They house like something like 50 people. They have beds for about 50 people or so. And there's all sorts of folks living in there. And they have volunteers from all over the Americas. I was there from the United States. I met somebody there from Costa Rica, people there from Mexico. And they just organize their lives around care for people who need a place to stay, either because they were just deported from the United States or because they're fleeing from whatever violence. I met someone from Syria, for example, someone who fled from the Syrian war. Somehow made it all the way to Tijuana because he's just trying to find like some way to survive. Probably the most touching story from my time there was I met this woman. She was very pregnant. She's from Guatemala. She was Mayan, and she was very pregnant and trying to get across. Fled some horrible scenarios and just wanted to raise a kid to have a life, like that's it. That is the motivation is to like raise a kid to have a life where they won't be threatened with violence, with death, with displacement. And this community, like there at the migrant shelter, threw her a baby shower. And just were like, look, there's this woman here with this child being born in the shadow of this empire that doesn't want her, and we care for her and her life. And so, it was like the grandest baby shower ever at that migrant shelter, cupcakes, lemonade, hot chocolate. It was just like this beautiful moment of, like we're taking care of ourselves in the midst of this world. We've got us.
Well, this world is full of now forced migration, right? We have displaced people more than ever. We have like, I don't know, the last time I checked, it was like 130 million or so displaced people around the world.
Oh,
And that was like 3 years ago, 4 years ago, I checked. And so I don't know what it is now.
yeah.
I moved to the Middle East in 2012 when the Syrian war started. And so we worked with Syrian refugees for a long time. And there was like 28 million displaced people at that point.
Oh my
And
gosh.
so in 10 years, it jumped by, 100 million. We've always seen migration around the world. It's not a new thing.
Mhm.
People have been moving all over the place. In the Bible really is a story of migration, of people wandering, going from place to place and finding a home with God and God tabernacling with them in the midst of migration, right? So can you just set the stage for us that migration isn't just about me trying to, I don't know, like personally just get in somewhere because I want to wreak havoc or do something or get my
Mhm.
own job, but it's just a fact of life that's been there from the beginning of time.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. Yeah. So maybe on one angle, like, yes, I mean, what it means to be a human being is to move. Like this is if you don't move, you're dead. That's not good. That's not a good thing. But we're always moving. Like that's a way of telling like the story of our species, moving with for hunting. You need to survive, so you hunt for food. Move with the climate, with the seasons. Move because of threats of violence. So yeah, I mean, and this North American, Central American, South American landscape, I mean, is a geography of movement. I mean, if you look back at the indigenous peoples in this area. I mean, yes, there's like clusters of people groups in different areas, but they kind of overlap and they kind of move around. So it's yeah, movement is normal. It only becomes something that's a problem with when borders are enforced in the particular ways that they are, and people think of national identities as over against basically brown people here in the United States. But yeah, like your turn to the Bible too. Yes, the Bible is a migration from the very beginning. It's a migration story. You have Adam and Eve who are forced out of the Garden of Eden, for their own good as a punishment for sin. Let's say there in Genesis, and then you kind of have this trajectory, this story of migration with Abraham, with Moses, with this sense of movement across time. And so yeah, in the Bible, Garden of Eden, movement from there. And then at the very end, I was just as you were talking, I was just thinking that the Bible ends with a migration story, but it's an interesting one because in the book of Revelation, the New Jerusalem actually migrates from heaven to earth. So it's like God's promise for new life is also a migration. It's not us leaving earth. It's actually heaven coming to earth. So it feels like migration up and down, all around is just part of the human story, part of the Bible story. The incarnation is God's migration story. This God who has come among us. We used to sing this song back in my charismatic days. Lord, I lift your name on high.
Oh, I could sing it.
You could sing it. But that line, you came from heaven to earth to show us the way.
Yeah.
That's a migration. I mean, that is God's migration because God loves us, to be with us, to be close to us. So I think that one of the things that I want to do with this book is to change the conversation to be like, hey, look, actually, the migration part, that's the normal part. That's what God does. That's what God's people do. I mean, from the early 4th, 5th century, Augustine of Hippo writes this super important book that we still read today called The City of God. And in it, what he terms the church is a pilgrim people. What it means to be the church is to be on pilgrimage on earth.
We're a pilgrim people. That is very true. We're always going to have foreigners among us. The call to the care for the foreigners among us is really clear in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
It's a clear call to love our foreigners. You talk about the road to Emmaus story and how that really amplifies what we're talking about. So can you take us into the road to Emmaus and what that story is and what you get out of it when it comes to the foreigner, the
Yeah.
stranger?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. The Emmaus. I love that story. Luke 24. So this is after the resurrection. Jesus is resurrected, but nobody knows quite what's going on. So, we remember the women, they lead the way and they're there at the tomb and it's empty. And Jesus tells Mary, says like, this is me, go tell the rest of the disciples. And she's like, oh my gosh, she tells the rest of the disciples. They don't believe her. Disbelieving women has been a problem for men for a long, long, long time. But yeah, they're the ones, they're the faithful disciples, the first ones to bear witness to the good news, tell the male disciples they don't believe them. They're all bewildered. What's going on here? There's Cleopas. So there's just bewilderment in Jerusalem. All the disciples, they know what's going on. Their friend is back alive, but they're just not sure what that means. Cleopas and his friend, another disciple, are leaving Jerusalem to go back home to Emmaus. And they're talking about all this, trying to process what's going on. And all of a sudden, this guy just comes up and said, hey, what are you all talking about? And this guy is Jesus, but they don't know it. It's Jesus incognito. And they call him, and the Greek word is parokeo, which means somebody in a place without citizenship. So a foreigner without citizenship. So, our translation could be alien, foreigner. Stranger is typically how I think like the NIV and NRSV translate it. But it's parokeo, it's alien. It's somebody who is like without citizenship in that land. So that's how Jesus looks to them. He looks like a foreigner. And I don't know, I feel like Cleopas is a little ornery when he encounters Jesus here, because he has this line where he's just like, are you the only one who does not know the things that have happened in Jerusalem? But if you think about it, you're just walking with your buddy and all of a sudden this stranger comes around and just like, wait, why are you like interrupting here? Anyhow, all that to say that resurrected Jesus there in the story appears as a foreigner, an alien, a stranger, someone without citizenship in that land. And he's an intrusion. He like comes and interrupts these folks and then he stays with them. He handles the annoyance and stays with them, keeps on talking, asking questions. They walk all the way back to Cleopas and the other disciple, the unnamed disciple, their home. And Cleopas says, you know what? It's getting really late. It's probably dangerous for you to walk back at this point. Just stay with us. And he's like, okay. Jesus is like, okay. So he's there, staying with them. They're around the table. It's time to have a meal. This is also the wild part is, everyone talks about this. They're sharing bread. Jesus breaks bread. And then in that moment, and then thanking God, blessing it, in that moment, their eyes are opened and they see who he is, and then he disappears. All that's amazing. The part that I'm just always amazed by is it's just this little detail where, so Jesus comes in, he's this foreigner, these guys are offering hospitality to him, this stranger who they just met, and it's time to eat food, and it says that Jesus offers them their bread. So it's like, Jesus goes to the pantry or the kitchen or the refrigerator, grabs their bread and says, hey, let me feed you with your own food in your own home. It's wild. So Jesus is the guest who becomes the host in the story, which I think is the power of the way the gospel is always flipping the scripts, messing with our power dynamic. So yeah, I think that this story is important just to show that the way that Jesus, or that this foreigner turns out to be Jesus among us. And we should attend to that. Like, that's the Bible story. I mean, it's, it's there in Genesis as well, where you have Abraham and Sarah in their tent. And all of a sudden it said, I mean, this is also just so interesting textual moment, because it says the Lord visited them. And then in the next verse, it says 3 strangers visited them. So it's these 3 strangers who the Bible identifies as the Lord. This becomes important for iconography, for this account being these 3 persons as the Trinity. Hebrews picks up on this passage too. In Hebrews, it says, hey, look, be careful to entertain strangers, because some have entertained angels unaware. That this is the Christian life, is we offer hospitality to strangers who actually might turn out to be God's presence among us.
So in hospitality and then in the breaking of the bread, we recognize Jesus. And sometimes when we show hospitality, or we're a good guest and we're hosted by the foreigner and the stranger, we actually get to recognize the face of Jesus. We get to see the face of Jesus in this interaction and this moment.
Yeah, you said that better than I did. Thanks, Josh. That's what I was trying to say. That's better.
I'm just reflecting back to you. So you said it. I'm just reflecting back. I just think that it's just it's a beautiful thing, that what hospitality does. And that little moment of flipping the script when Jesus becomes host instead of the guest. As a Westerner, I really like to host people and show people hospitality. I'm not as good at receiving hospitality.
Yep.
As we are showing love to the foreigner among us, the immigrant, the refugee, how can we be a good guest to them, which then elevates who they are, and I think shows greater humanity among them. I'm not here to go fix them. I'm here to encounter them and be with them.
You've gotten to the crux of the Christian life, because I mean, that's what it is. It's the gospel is that we've been given a life by God that through no fault of our own, like we have life. We didn't give ourselves life. Like, we depend on others, parents, neighbors, caregivers. So much of who we are is dependent on the grace of another. And sin teaches us to live in this life as if that's not the case, that is the case, that we're independent, that we can do it on our own, that we've actually made something of ourselves, that these gifts that make us who we are actually possessions that we deserve. Yeah, this Jesus who says, look at the birds of the air, like God takes care of them. They don't have bank accounts. They don't have possessions. And what does it mean that like all of our possessions end up possessing us? Like, they become a spirituality that says you live in the world only because you have to, make the most of it and defend yourself against others because they're there to take your stuff. Yeah, this is like the fundamental thing. And I don't have an answer. I mean, I do have a retirement account that hopefully, I mean, it seems to be shrinking these days, actually. I think I need that money to survive. And, there's Jesus who's like, anyone who asks you, give to them. Like, because it's not ours. It's not ours to begin with. There's Basil of Caesarea has this great line. No, it's John Chrysostom has this great line where he's like, might be either of them or both of them, now that I think about it. If you own 2 coats, you've stolen one from the poor. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Like, that is real. Anyhow, so I think all of like what you're naming here, and
but my 8 coats have different purposes. They have different purposes.
Yeah, right. I mean, it gets cold in Kansas City. Come on,
That's
now.
right. I know.
But I think what ends up happening is this like mentality of scarcity that we believe in with our lives, with our checkbooks, with our work, not maybe like we don't think about it very much, but we live a life that believes in it, gets leveled up into this thing called the nation state, this recent invention of the 18th century that now determines where people live and how they move and how they relate. And now all of a sudden we're like, yeah, we got to protect this country from others. And yeah, that feels like it gets more and more dangerous, more and more sinful, more and more treating like this world as our possession. And that's that's wrong. That is not the gospel. I mean, that's wrong feels trite, but like it's just not the gospel. That's not how we're taught to live.
There is enough.
There's
You are
enough.
enough. We
Yeah.
are enough. And there is enough to go around for everybody. And it is proven that there is enough. Like if we actually have a different way of life, a way of not scarcity, but a way of sharing and cooperation, like there's enough for all of us, and to live an abundant life in the kingdom of God. So as you were writing this, there's a lot of stories that you know about, that you've experienced, that you have been a part of. What are some of the stories? What are some of the things that give you hope when it comes to people actually showing love and care for immigrants?
Yeah. I mean, the one story is maybe this says too much about me and my disposition in the world, how I how I think about things, my personality, whatever. But when I think about your question about hope and what gives me hope, the story that comes to my mind is actually one that's very I find very meaningful in a somber way. So there's this artist in Arizona, southern Arizona, in Tucson. His name's Alvaro Enciso, and he's a immigrant from Colombia, came here, decades ago. He's older now. And he has started this installation project, art project, where he makes crosses in his studio at home from found objects in the desert where people who've crossed the border, they've left stuff because they're running away from a border patrol and have to drop backpacks or whatever it might be, or they just have to, drop stuff in order to keep on living, make their packs lighter, or in some cases, somebody might die and their remains and their what they had with them is there in the desert. Anyhow, so he collects these items as found objects that he incorporates into his crosses as relics. And so for him, these all these different items that he finds, he says that they tell a story that we'll never know. And they tell a story of a life that we'll never know. But they need to be remembered because we want to honor those people's lives. And so his crosses tell a plot line for a story that is a mystery to us, is how he thinks about it. And so he makes these crosses, and then the coroner's office there in Southern Arizona and the University of Arizona, they've developed an online database that documents with GPS coordinates wherever remains were found. Somebody was found who was crossing the border. Part of it, the reason why they're doing this is so that people from family members who are wondering where their loved ones might be can look in this database to see if they might have died in the desert, because they're able to put whatever kind of personal information that they can, identifying information they can in the database. Anyhow, so Alvaro uses the GPS coordinates, and he goes out there and plants a cross, and he takes people with. I went with him, and he has a ritual for planting a cross in the ground, where the exact place where they found the remains, in order to honor that person's life. And it's a contemplative moment. It's a moment to think about shared humanity. What does it mean to live in this country where this happens? How do we become responsible caretakers for the dead? I mean, he really thinks about this as, how do we care for the dead? His art project is called Where Dreams Come to Die. And it's, he says, he chased the American dream at a time when this country welcomed immigrants, and that has changed. And now this is a place, the borderlands where dreams come to die. That database has, I think, 4,000 people who've been logged in, people who've died in that desert in Arizona. I think they started keeping track in early 2000s, maybe 2001. And Alvaro says so his routine is once a week he does this. He goes out and plants 3 crosses. He finds 3 different places to do it. He's done, I don't know, over 1,000 crosses at this point. and he says that he will finish his art project when he turns 127. Unless, I mean, that's if people don't keep on dying, which they are. But I mean, this is his life. This is what he does. So I find this both like the realism of it. Here's somebody who's like, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to change this world, but here's something I can do. And this is super meaningful because Christians are always people that care about the dead. I mean, this is something you can trace through the history of the church, is that we, starting with Jesus and those women who cared for his corpse and watched after his tomb. We are people who care for the dead. And this is what he does as like the one thing that he can do to somehow sustain his hope for a world where at some point people won't die in the desert.
That's a beautiful story, and that's beautiful what he does. And so if, somebody is moved and they want to join him in that project, you could actually help him finish that before he's 127 or 126. So go join him in that. It's beautiful. You talked about scarcity as one thing that actually hinders our love of immigrants in a tangible way. I think fear is another thing. And I think, especially in America, we are people of fear. We just are afraid that people are going to either take our stuff or we're afraid of all sorts of things, right? And for you, that started a lot, 9/11, like, hey, we're afraid. It's a crusade. We're going to go kill. Like, it's really tough. How do we counteract the fear in the wider culture? What are some ways that we could say love actually is greater than fear? The way that we're not called to be a people of fear.
I mean, I don't want this to sound, this is like basics for me with the faith, I guess. And maybe I could spell it out, but it's the resurrection. I mean, at the end of the day, like the reason why we don't have to be afraid is because Jesus has shown us the future for all of it. We are promised resurrection, that Christ has defeated death. The last enemy to be destroyed is death, Paul says. So that fear, so this is where I think, like, I don't know how this gets mixed up in our world and for us as Christians and our relationship to non-Christians is, there's this long trope, this myth of characterizing Christians as being so heavenly minded that they're no earthly good. Like with our minds fixed on heaven, we were like, we're just trying to escape this world, and God has promised us a room with many mansions and all that kind of stuff. But I don't think that's what the promise of resurrection should mean to us. At least it doesn't mean that for me. Instead, what resurrection means is that we have been freed from the power of death to rule our lives. We can live as if death were not, because God's love for us and the world has defeated death. So I think that at the very core is just who we are as Christians. Like, I mean, even if we don't have enough, you know what I mean? Like, let's say we do live in a scarce world and resources, or, it's like the apocalyptic Mad Max world out there. The promise of the gospel is like, we don't have to sacrifice who we are as human beings, how we're created to be as people who love one another. We don't have to sacrifice that for anything, because God resurrects the dead, that God cares for us even after we're dead. I don't know where you are, theologically, Joshua, but I mean, I feel just very straightforwardly orthodox on this, that we have hope. We don't have to live in the fear of death because we've been promised resurrection, because that's what Jesus has shown us.
Amen. If we could receive that, like truly receive it, and then if we receive it, then we could live it, our world would be a totally different place than it is right now. So let's receive that life and the resurrection life that dispels and defeats death so that we can live a non-death life here and now. Beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, this is where I like what some parts of what my Catholic friends and the Pope has talked about, like this, the gospel has something to say about this culture of death that we live in. This is like we live, corporations make money off of our fear of death. I mean, the budget of this country, everyone's talking about, it's not Doge or whatever to save money. It's the military. Like the military, that is what our money goes to. This country is just like one big army that also worries sometimes about healthcare. It's basically what the budget is. The politics of this world is one that is about mitigating death and who is allowed to die and who shouldn't die. And we just have to extricate ourselves from that way of thinking about the world and our neighbors. So instead, neighbors are not enemies. Instead, they're gifts from God.
Amen. That's so good. Isaac, just a couple quick questions at the end here. One, if you go back to your 21-year-old self, what advice would you give?
Whoa. You know what? Actually, I'm remembering now that I was listening to some of your podcasts and I remember hearing that, but I'd forgotten. So, I mean, this is the thing. So I'm now in my 40s and I'm realizing now that I am stuck with who I am. And like, no matter what we do, we just kind of have to realize that like we are who we are. God has given us and that's not going to change fundamentally. And to be okay with that. I think in my 20s and probably into my 30s, I was trying to figure out if I could be somebody else and fighting against like just personality things. I mean, we have other people in our lives that we look up to and we're like, oh yeah, I want to be like that someday. And that's just not good. I mean, sometimes if it's a good person, I guess, but but like just to realize, what, there's just something okay about us, and we're gonna make the best with what we got. I wish my 21-year-old self would have known that and told me that, and I wish I didn't have to learn that now in my 40s.
That's really good. That's solid. But I really do think that that's probably something people do learn in their 40s. It's just a natural way of life. This is what we learn in our 40s. If we're going to continue life in a direction that's positive and healthy and we continue to grow, that's what we're going to learn.
Yeah.
And so that's good. You've learned it in your 40s. Good job.
Taking me a while with everybody else. What a nice little girl here.
That's right. Anything you've been reading or watching lately you can recommend?
Ooh. Well, I mean, I watched this documentary a few times over the years, but telling about that one documentary short you just saw reminds me of this other. It's a documentary called Santuario, Santurio, and it's made by a friend, Pilar Tempain, and she documents somebody who lived in sanctuary during the first Trump administration here in North Carolina, Juana, in Greensboro, and it's just this powerful documentary of a woman who is fighting to stay here with her family and the church's witness in the midst of it all. And what I love about the documentary is that, like, I don't know, I want those moments where it's just like, oh, this is exciting stuff. We're doing something for the gospel. This is awesome. But then realizing that most of the time doing church work is like making spreadsheets or whatever. That's a very mundane. And so this documentary captures the mundane life of a congregation and somebody in sanctuary, and just kind of like how ordinary it is to live together and to make this life possible, even though there's this threat looming on the outside. So Santuario is what I would recommend.
Excellent. Exciting. Good recommendation. How can people go out and get Migrant God? Where would you like to point people to? Is there anywhere that you'd like to connect people with of what you're doing?
I'd say, the book's available everywhere. Erdman's likes people to buy it from their website, but it's on Amazon. Everything's fine. But yeah, that's awesome. Please do buy the book. Hopefully it's inspiring to like see what people are up to, what's possible out there when in the world of immigration politics where it feels so bad for a lot of us most of the time. But I'll say the group that I would highlight, I mean, buy the book or not, but the people to pay attention to right now is actually Church World Service. I would say like go to their website, Church World Service. They're a national organization, Christian organization that helps resettle people who've sought asylum or refugees in this country. And the federal government has just cut their funding, and it's just throwing everybody into turmoil. People are being laid off, friends of mine. And yet there's people here who've been promised by the government to be taken care of. And yeah, so the way to support them is Church World Service. Look them up. I'm sure if you're in a big city, I'm sure they have a local office.
Yeah. Hey, excellent. Yeah. Go Church World Service, go donate and help people keep jobs that are desperately needed and money to the families that have just come that are promised for only 3 months, which is crazy. But,
Yeah.
and then they have to go and get jobs and fend for themselves and, and that's learning a new language. And, it's a lot crazy work. So we have adopted a couple of families here in Kansas City, new refugee families, and the Refugee Resettlement Agency lost all of their funding for this family, and so our church stepped up, donated all the money for these families, which is fantastic.
That's awesome.
But there's so much work that the church needs to do to care and love, and so that's a great thing to do. Isaac, thank you for this conversation. I really enjoyed talking to you. I enjoyed this, your stories and the way that you just unfolded the heart of God for all people and for immigrants and refugees and the migrants in our community and what that looks like to practically love our neighbor, to practically like come around people, and that our calling first and foremost is to love more than anything else. All the policies and procedures will work themselves out, but we get to stand with people and for people. We get to receive people's hospitality and give hospitality so that we can see the face of Jesus in each other. So thank you, Isaac. It was fantastic.
Thank you, Joshua. Yeah, it's been great to be with you. Really helpful, interesting, insightful questions and comments. So this has been, I've really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Shifting Culture. This show was edited and produced by me, Joshua Johnson, at Shifting Culture Productions. If you're enjoying the conversations, consider supporting the work by subscribing at shiftingculture.substack.com. For as little as $5 a month, you'll get ad-free early access episodes and other exclusive content delivered straight to your inbox. I'd love for you to not just listen, but engage. Reach out. Share what's resonating, and let's keep shaping culture together. Whether you're a listener with feedback, a creative with an idea, or a brand looking to connect with a thoughtful, engaged audience, let's talk. If you're interested in advertising on the show, I'd love to hear from you. Contact me directly for rates and availability. Until next time, let's keep shifting culture.